This is my true story. I spent my life working through bitter winters, building a home, and saving money so my family would never suffer the way I once did. I thought my old age would be filled with warmth and care. But instead, one night, they pushed me outside into the freezing cold and locked the door. I sat shivering, listening to their laughter while my body grew numb. What they forgot was one simple truth. I still controlled the inheritance they dreamed about. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And please, subscribe. All my life, I worked in the cold. Winter after winter, I carried wood on my shoulders. I shoveled paths through snow that reached my knees, and I stood outside while my hands turned red and stiff. I did it not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My family needed heat, my children needed food, and my wife needed security. I told myself from the beginning that I would not allow them to live the kind of childhood I had lived. I knew what it meant to go to bed shivering, and I swore my children would never feel that pain. I worked in factories where the roof leaked and the wind blew through cracks. I worked in fields where the frost bit into my skin until I could not even feel my fingers. I carried heavy loads when my back already ached, and I walked home in boots that were worn through to the sole. Many times my body begged me to stop, but I kept going. Every hour of work meant more stability for them. Every coin I saved meant a step closer to safety for my family. The house I built was not big, not fancy, but it was strong. I laid its bricks one by one, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors helping when they saw how hard I pushed myself. I hammered nails until my hands blistered, and I cut wood until my arms trembled. But when the roof went up and the first fire burned inside, I looked at my children's faces glowing in the warmth, and I knew it was worth it. They would sleep without fear of snow falling on them. They would wake up warm, not shivering. That was my gift. I also made sure they had education. I worked overtime shifts. I skipped meals. I gave up small pleasures. While other men my age bought new coats or saved for themselves, I gave it all to my children's schooling. I wanted them to have the chance I never had. The chance to sit in a classroom, to learn, to grow, to escape the endless cycle of labor that trapped me. I remember nights when I came home so tired I could barely stand, but when I saw them bent over their books, I felt proud. My suffering was not wasted. Every winter I stood outside chopping wood before dawn, making sure the fire never died. My hands cracked, my breath heavy, but my children always woke up in warmth. They never knew how hard it was to keep that fire alive. They only knew it was always burning. That was enough for me. A father does not need thanks when he sees his children safe. I also saved money. Quietly. Slowly. Each paycheck, I set a little aside. I opened accounts in my name, invested in small things, and kept records neat. I told myself that one day, when I grew old, this would be my security. Not just for me, but for them too. I thought they would see that everything I built, everything I saved, was meant for them. The inheritance was their safety net, the proof of my lifetime of labor. I believed they would be grateful. I believed they would honor me. I poured every ounce of my life into building not just walls and savings, but trust. I thought trust was unbreakable. I thought blood meant loyalty. I thought my old age would bring warmth from the very people I had warmed with my sacrifices. I thought the same hands I once carried through the snow would one day carry me when I was weak. I never asked for riches. I never asked for rewards. I only asked for respect, for care, for a little warmth in return. I thought that when my hair turned white and my back bent with age, my family would see me not as a burden, but as the man who gave them everything. I believed love grows stronger with time, not weaker. I believed gratitude does not fade, it deepens. But I was wrong. The very family I sacrificed for, the very children I raised from hunger into comfort, the very house I built to shield them from the cold, they would one day push me into that same cold. They would forget my sacrifices, they would erase my love, and they would treat me as nothing. The warmth I gave them was returned with ice. And yet, as cruel as that truth is, I still remember this. I gave them everything. My life was a sacrifice, and I made it without regret. But it was in those sacrifices that I also planted something they forgot. I planted power. Because in building the house, in saving the money, in writing the papers, I kept my name tied to it all. And that decision, made years ago in silence, would one day become the key to my justice. The betrayal did not come like a sudden storm. It came slowly, like frost creeping across a window until the glass is no longer clear. My family's words grew colder long before the night they abandoned me. I could hear it in the way they spoke, short and sharp, as if I were an annoyance. I could feel it in the way they looked at me, not with warmth, but with irritation, as though my presence was a weight dragging them down. I told myself to endure. I told myself family could not turn cruel. But one night, they proved me wrong. It was evening, the air outside colder than usual, the kind of cold that cuts into your bones the moment you step outside. I sat quietly in the living room, hoping to share a warm meal with them. But instead of kindness, an argument began. My voice was not raised. I only reminded them of something small, something ordinary, but their reaction was sharp. They told me I interfered too much, that I was useless, that I should stop thinking this was still my house. Their words were like knives, cutting into the heart of a man who once built every wall around them. Before I could even answer, before I could remind them of the years I gave them, they ordered me to leave. At first, I thought it was only words spoken in anger. I thought they would calm down, that their hearts would soften. But no. They stood together, their faces hard, and they pushed me toward the door. My legs trembled, not from weakness, but from shock. How could the same children I carried on my shoulders now force me out like a stranger? When the door opened, the wind rushed in, sharp and merciless. I begged them with my eyes, not with words, because I still believed they would remember. But they did not. They shoved me out, and before I could step back inside, the door slammed shut. The sound of the lock sliding into place echoed louder than thunder in my ears. I was locked out of my own home. I stood there shivering, the cold biting through my thin clothes. My breath came out in clouds, my hands shaking, my teeth clattering. I knocked on the door softly at first, then harder, but no one opened. Instead, I heard laughter inside. Not nervous laughter, not laughter of joy, but laughter sharp with cruelty. They mocked me from the warmth of the home I built, while I stood outside freezing in the dark. Each second felt like an hour. The porch that I once built to welcome my family now felt like a stage for my humiliation. My body bent under the cold, but my heart bent under something worse: betrayal. The family I thought would keep me warm in old age had chosen instead to watch me freeze. The house that had been my dream, my sacrifice, my gift to them, had become my prison. But this time the prison walls were made of ice. I stood in that cold night, remembering all the winters I had carried wood into the house, all the nights I had worked until my body ached just to keep them warm. I remembered their small hands held close to the fire, their laughter as the flames crackled. I remembered watching them sleep under thick blankets while I stayed awake to feed the fire. I thought those memories were proof of my love. But now, they were reminders of how easily love can be forgotten. The betrayal was complete the moment I realized they had no intention of opening the door. They had decided I was no longer a father, no longer needed, no longer worth food or warmth. To them, I was already gone, even as I stood outside their door. That night, the cold did not just cut into my skin. It cut into my heart, and the scar it left would never fade. That night felt endless. The cold wrapped around me like chains, and every breath I took burned in my chest, as if the air itself wanted me gone. I sat down on the porch, pulling my thin jacket tight, but it did nothing. The wind sliced through me, sharp as a blade, and my bones ached with every gust. I curled into myself, shivering, trying to make my body small, trying to hold on to any piece of warmth that might remain inside me, but there was none. I had been pushed into the night with nothing, and the night showed me no mercy. As I sat there trembling, my mind drifted back to other winters. Winters when I was the one who carried wood to keep the fire alive. Winters when my children never had to feel the sting of frost. I remembered walking for miles through snow to bring back food, my hands raw, my feet numb, but my heart determined. I remembered breaking ice on the river to collect water, even when the cold left my skin bleeding. I remembered watching my children laugh by the fire while I stood in the shadows, tired and hungry, but proud that they were safe. Every memory cut deeper that night, because the same children who once sat close to me for warmth were now the ones who left me in the cold. Hours passed slowly. The sky grew darker, the stars sharper, and the silence heavier. From inside the house, I could hear muffled sounds, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices, the faint hum of laughter. They were warm. They were fed. They were safe. And I was outside, forgotten, freezing, abandoned. My teeth chattered so hard it hurt my jaw, and my fingers grew stiff until I could barely move them. I rubbed my hands together, but it did nothing. The cold did not care. At one point I tried to stand, to pace the porch just to keep my blood moving. My legs wobbled beneath me, weak from both age and the bitter cold. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing, and for a moment, I thought I would fall. I leaned against the wood, the same railing I once painted years ago with care, and I let out a breath that came out as a cloud of despair. This was my house. My labor built it. My sweat filled its walls, and yet I was no longer welcome inside it. I lowered myself back down, pulling my knees close to my chest. My body shook, my lips cracked, my head heavy. Hunger clawed at my stomach, but the cold made it fade into a dull ache. I thought about the times I skipped meals so my children could eat more. I thought about the times I sat at the table pretending I was full so they wouldn't feel guilty. And now, here I was, left with nothing, not even a crust of bread to keep me alive through the night. The hours dragged on. I tried to close my eyes, but the cold made it impossible to sleep. My bones rattled, my heart pounded, and every part of me felt like it was breaking. I whispered prayers, asking for strength, asking for warmth, asking for anything to ease the suffering. But the night answered with silence. Only the wind spoke, howling through the cracks of the porch like a cruel reminder of where I was. Yet in that endless suffering, one thought gave me strength. I remembered that while they had locked me out, while they had taken away food and warmth, they had not taken away everything. The one thing they forgot was that I still held the papers. I still held the inheritance. I still held the future they believed belonged to them. They had pushed me into the cold, but in their arrogance, they had forgotten who controlled the fire of their fortune. That thought flickered like a small flame inside me, weak but alive, and it kept me from collapsing completely. The night was long, but it did not last forever. And as I sat there, freezing, shivering, suffering, I promised myself that when the morning came, I would not forget this pain. I would not forget this betrayal, and I would not forgive it. When the night finally loosened its grip and the gray of morning crept across the sky, I was still sitting there, stiff and trembling. My body felt as if it had aged 10 more years in one night. My joints ached, my lips were cracked, and my skin felt as thin as paper. I was weak, but I was alive. And as the light returned, so did something else: clarity. That cold night had burned away every illusion I still held. I realized the truth I had been too blind, too hopeful, too forgiving to see before. My family did not see me as a father anymore. They saw me as nothing. It hurt me more than the cold ever could, because while my body had suffered from the freezing air, my heart had suffered from something worse: the loss of love. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years. The long hours in the snow, the frozen hands carrying wood, the empty stomach so they could eat, the tired body that never rested. I thought about every winter I endured just to make sure they were warm. And now, those same children, those same people I lived for, had thrown me into the very cold I once saved them from. I sat there, hunched over, shivering, but my mind began to sharpen. It was strange. While my body weakened, my thoughts grew stronger. My suffering became a mirror, showing me the truth without mercy. I realized I had been living in a lie that family always remembers sacrifice, a lie that blood always means loyalty. The truth was different. Blood can turn cold. Sacrifice can be forgotten. Love can rot in the hearts of those who grow greedy. But then another truth came to me, a truth that gave me strength. While they had the power to push me out into the night, they did not have the power to erase everything. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was just an old man waiting to die. They thought they held all the control. But they were wrong. They had forgotten something important, something I had never spoken of but always carried quietly: the inheritance. The fortune I built, the land I purchased, the properties I secured, the savings I put away. None of it was in their hands yet. They lived as if it already belonged to them, as if my life was just an obstacle standing in the way of their future wealth. But the truth was, every document, every deed, every account was still tied to me. Every signature needed was mine. Every right was mine. I still controlled it all. As I realized this, my heart grew steady. They thought I was worthless, but I was not. I still held the power to decide who would inherit what. I still held the key to their future. They had forgotten that the man they threw out into the cold was the same man who could, with one stroke of a pen, strip them of everything they believed was already theirs. The suffering of that night became my awakening. My body shook, but my mind was firm. I knew then that I would no longer sit quietly. I would no longer endure humiliation without answer. I would no longer let their cruelty pass without consequence. They left me in the cold, but I would leave them with nothing. I stayed silent when they finally opened the door in the morning, pretending as if nothing had happened. I walked inside with lowered eyes, but inside my heart, a fire was burning. The realization had come, and once it arrived, there was no turning back. When I walked back into the house after that long night, my body was shaking, but my mind was steady. I kept quiet. I did not speak a word of the cold, the pain, or the humiliation. They thought my silence meant weakness, but in truth my silence was a shield. Behind it, my thoughts were sharper than ever, and the more I thought, the clearer it became. They had forgotten something that I never forgot. The wealth, the inheritance, the very future they believed belonged to them. It was still mine to control. They moved around the house with arrogance, speaking to me as if I were already gone. They whispered about what they would do once I was no longer alive. They made plans with my money as if it was already theirs. They talked about properties I had bought, land I had secured, and accounts I had saved over decades. They spoke of it openly, never realizing that every piece of paper, every legal right, every signature still belonged to me. I sat in my chair and listened. They thought I was deaf. They thought I was blind. They thought my age made me foolish. But I heard everything. I understood everything. And with each word they spoke, my heart grew colder toward them. They believed they had already taken control, but the truth was hidden in plain sight. All of it was still in my name. The house itself, the very walls they laughed inside, was still legally mine. The savings they counted as their own future security were still tied to my signature. The land they boasted about to relatives, claiming it would make them powerful, was still under my authority. They could not touch any of it without me. They had pushed me into the cold, but they had forgotten that I still held the fire. I remembered the lawyer's words years ago when I signed the papers. He told me I had kept the deeds under my control, that no change could happen without me. At the time, I did it to protect the family, to make sure no one would waste the inheritance before the right time. But now I saw it differently. What was once protection became my weapon. What was once a safety net for them became a noose around their arrogance. As I sat silently in the house, pretending to be weak, pretending to be broken, I felt a strange strength. They thought they had stripped me of everything. They thought locking me out into the freezing night proved I was powerless. But the hidden truth was the opposite. They had no future without me. Their greed blinded them so much that they forgot who still held the pen. I realized then that I would not waste my breath arguing with them. Words would do nothing. They had already hardened their hearts against me. They would not listen to stories of sacrifice. They would not listen to reminders of love. They had chosen cruelty, and cruelty has no ears for reason. But the law listens, paper listens, signatures listen, and that was where my strength waited. The hidden truth was simple. They had abandoned me, but in doing so, they abandoned their own future. They believed the inheritance was theirs by right, but it was still mine by law. And the moment I decided to act, their arrogance would collapse like ice under the sun. I said nothing, but inside I whispered to myself, "You left me in the cold. Now I will leave you with nothing." That night, after pretending to eat in silence at the table and pretending not to notice the way they looked at me with annoyance, I went to my room and lay down on the old bed. My body was still weak from the cold night on the porch. My bones ached, my chest burned with every breath, and sleep would not come. But my mind did not rest. My mind turned over every memory, every humiliation, every sacrifice I had made, and every cruel act they had done to me. And in that darkness, I came to a decision that changed everything. I had spent too long believing silence was love, too long believing endurance was strength, too long believing family would eventually see my sacrifices and honor me. But the night they forced me out into the cold killed that illusion. It froze it, shattered it, and left me with a truth I could no longer ignore. They would never change. They would never see me as a father. They would never treat me with respect. To them, I was just an old man waiting to die. And they were waiting, not with care, but with greed. But they had forgotten that I was not powerless. They had forgotten that the inheritance they bragged about, the wealth they believed belonged to them, was still mine. They had forgotten that every paper, every account, every deed carried my name. And as I lay in that bed, my hands trembling but my heart steady, I knew what I had to do. I would not fight them with anger. I would not scream or beg. I would not lower myself to their cruelty. I would strike them in the place they worshipped most, money. I decided that the next morning, I would leave the house. I would walk to my lawyer, even if it took every ounce of strength I had left. I would sit in his office, place my name on new papers, and remove them from my will forever. I would erase them from the future they believed was secure. The inheritance they counted as theirs would vanish from their reach, and they would be left with nothing but regret. This decision did not come from hate. It came from clarity. A father can forgive many things, but betrayal this deep cannot be healed by forgiveness. They had left me to freeze in the dark. They had chosen to treat me as worthless. And so I chose to show them the truth. Without me, they had nothing. I lay there in the quiet, the sound of their laughter drifting faintly from another room, and I closed my eyes. I pictured their faces when they would one day discover that their inheritance was gone. I pictured the silence that would fall in the house when they realized the future they had mocked me for protecting had been taken away by my own hand. And that image warmed me more than any fire could. By the time the first light of morning crept through my window, my decision was firm. My body might have been frail, but my will was strong. I would endure long enough to act. I would live long enough to write their betrayal into law. I would make sure my name gave them nothing, not even a single coin. That was the night I stopped being silent. That was the night I decided, if they could throw me into the cold, then I could leave them with nothing. The next morning, I gathered what little strength I had left and rose from my bed. My bones ached, my knees shook, but my decision pushed me forward like a force stronger than pain. I dressed in my old coat, the same one I had worn during countless winters of labor, and I stepped out of the house. No one stopped me. They barely noticed me leave. They thought I was just an old man wandering with no purpose. But in truth, I was walking toward the moment that would change everything. The cold wind pressed against me as I made my way to the lawyer's office. Each step was heavy, but every step was also filled with purpose. I thought of the night they left me outside. I thought of their laughter as I shivered. I thought of the times they looked at me like I was useless. And with every memory, my resolve grew stronger. By the time I reached the office, I was not just a weak old man. I was a father ready to take back his dignity. When I sat down with my lawyer, he looked at me with concern. He saw my tired face, the marks of cold still on my skin, but he also saw the fire in my eyes. I placed my trembling hands on the table and told him what I wanted. I wanted my will rewritten. I wanted every name that had betrayed me erased. I wanted the inheritance they bragged about stripped from their grasp. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. My lawyer listened in silence, nodding slowly, and then began to prepare the documents. Page after page, I signed my name. My hands shook, but each signature was a strike of justice. I removed them from deeds, from accounts, from every future claim they thought they owned. I redirected everything: the properties, the land, the savings, the investments. Some I placed into the hands of relatives who still treated me with respect. Some I left for charities, places where my life's work could help people who truly needed it. And some I kept under my own name, secured so that I would live the rest of my days with dignity. The papers were made airtight, sealed by law, unbreakable by challenge. My lawyer assured me that no matter what they tried, they could not undo what I had done. With one morning of signatures, I had erased their future. I had transferred power from their greedy hands into places they could never touch. Their betrayal had turned them into beggars, though they did not know it yet. When the last paper was signed, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. My body was weak, but my spirit was stronger than it had ever been. I had done it. I had taken back control. I had turned their cruelty into their curse. The inheritance they waited for would never be theirs. The fortune they counted as certain was gone. The home they locked me out of might still stand, but the foundation of their future had been ripped away with my pen. I walked out of that office slowly, leaning on my cane, but inside I felt tall. The cold wind hit my face again, but it no longer cut me. This time, it felt like freedom. Because I knew that while they thought I was powerless, I had just rewritten their fate. Weeks passed before the truth reached them. At first, they went on as usual, their voices loud with pride, their laughter filling the rooms, their words sharp whenever they spoke to me. They still believed the inheritance was theirs, as if my fortune and my property were already in their pockets. I watched them speak carelessly about the future, about what they would buy, how they would live, and how they would boast to relatives when my life was over. They carried themselves like kings and queens sitting on a throne, blind to the fact that the throne had already been taken from beneath them. Then the letter arrived. It came quietly, in the hands of an official. They did not know what it was at first. They opened it at the table, expecting routine words, maybe bank updates or property notices. But as their eyes scanned the paper, I saw the color drain from their faces. Silence fell across the room, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself has turned to stone. They looked at me then, their eyes wide, their mouths opening but no words coming out. They had just read what I had already known. They were no longer part of my inheritance. Panic replaced their arrogance in an instant. Their voices rose, full of anger and disbelief. They shouted that it was impossible, that it was unfair, that the law must be wrong. They waved the papers in the air, demanding answers from me. I sat in my chair, calm, silent, steady. I did not need to raise my voice. The truth had already spoken for me, written in ink they could never erase. They tried to challenge it. They called the lawyer. They begged for explanations. They insisted it was a mistake. But the law did not bend for them. The lawyer told them plainly, the documents were signed, sealed, and binding. Nothing could change them. No amount of shouting or begging could undo what had been done. I had removed them completely, and the inheritance was gone from their hands forever. The rage in their eyes turned quickly to fear. They had lived believing the future was secured, that they could treat me however they wished because my fortune would still fall into their laps. But now they realized the truth. Their cruelty had destroyed their future. Their greed had blinded them. Their arrogance had left them with nothing. For the first time, they lowered their voices around me. For the first time, I saw hesitation in their eyes instead of pride. But it was too late. They had shown me who they were. They had thrown me into the cold. They had laughed while I froze, and I would never forget it. Their shock was not just about money, it was about power. They realized the old man they had mocked still held control all along. They realized the man they thought was weak had turned out to be the strongest of all. Their plans, their arrogance, their future, All of it had vanished in silence, erased by the hand they underestimated. I watched them crumble, and I did not feel pity. I felt justice. After the truth was revealed, the house was never the same. The walls that once echoed with arrogance now carried silence. Their laughter died, replaced with whispers, arguments, and blame. They walked around restless, their eyes heavy with worry, their voices sharp with anger at each other. They had thought their future was secure, that my inheritance was a treasure waiting for them. Now, they had nothing to look forward to but shame. Relatives heard of what had happened. Some called me, their voices heavy with disbelief, saying they could not understand how my own family could betray me in such a cruel way. Others spoke quietly among themselves, shaking their heads when they saw my children in public. Neighbors, too, began to whisper. They remembered the night I was forced out into the cold, and now they understood why I walked with a new calmness afterward. The story spread quickly. The family who abandoned their father in the cold had been abandoned themselves, not with words, but with the stroke of a pen. Their pride collapsed in front of everyone. The same people who once bragged about their future wealth now lowered their eyes when others asked questions. Their reputation, once a shield they carried, now became a curse. They were known not as successful, not as fortunate, but as cruel and ungrateful. They tried to hide, but the truth followed them wherever they went. Inside the house, their treatment toward me changed overnight. They spoke more carefully, with voices softer, their faces nervous. They brought me food without me asking. They tried to act like they cared, but I saw through it. Their actions did not come from love. They came from fear. They thought perhaps I had left a part of the inheritance untouched. They thought perhaps they could earn their way back into my will. But I had already decided. They were erased forever. I lived each day with quiet dignity. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I did not remind them of the cold night that had broken me. I simply carried on, knowing that justice had been done. Every time I ate a warm meal, I remembered the hunger of that night, and I whispered to myself that I would never let them forget. Every time I sat by the fire, I remembered the freezing air outside the door, and I reminded myself that the warmth I felt now was the warmth of justice. Their downfall was not dramatic. It was slow, heavy, and permanent. Without the inheritance, their plans fell apart. The businesses they hoped to build never began. The purchases they dreamed of making never happened. Their arrogance turned into quiet desperation, but no one offered them sympathy. People remembered too well how they treated me, and I made sure they would never again touch what I had built. The aftermath was simple. They had abandoned me in the cold, and in return, I had abandoned them with nothing. Their betrayal was answered, not with anger, but with silence written into law. In the end, justice did not come with shouting. It did not come with fists or anger. It came quietly, through ink and paper, through decisions made in silence but carrying the weight of a lifetime. My family thought they had the power to decide my worth. They thought pushing me into the cold meant I was powerless. But the truth was, I still held the key to everything they desired. And when they forgot that, when they treated me as if I were nothing, I reminded them with the only weapon I needed, the inheritance. Now I live with dignity. My days are simple, but they are filled with peace. I eat meals at my own table, warm meals that no one can take away from me. I sit by a fire that I light myself, and as I watch the flames, I remember the night I froze outside the door. I no longer shiver from that memory. Instead, I feel strength. Because I survived it. Because I turned it into justice. Because I proved to myself that even in weakness, I still had power. The family who betrayed me now live under the shadow of their own actions. They walk in the village with lowered heads. They hear the whispers. They feel the stares. They know what people think of them. Their name is no longer respected. It is marked with disgrace. They cannot escape it, because cruelty leaves scars not only on its victim, but also on the ones who commit it. They left me in the cold, and now they live in the coldness of shame. I do not hate them. I do not wish them pain, but I will never forgive them. Forgiveness is not given to those who laugh while their father freezes. Forgiveness is not given to those who forget the man who gave them everything. My justice is not about revenge. It is about truth. And the truth is simple. They never deserved what I built. They never deserved my legacy. They never deserved my name. So I gave it elsewhere. To those who respected me, to those who showed kindness, to those who understood that a man's worth is not measured by his age, but by his sacrifices. My wealth, my properties, my savings, they now serve purposes my family could never understand. They feed the hungry. They help relatives who once stood by me. They keep me alive in ways my own blood never could. That is justice. That is legacy. When I walk through the streets now, people greet me with respect. They know my story. They know what was done to me, and they know how I answered it. Not with cruelty, but with quiet strength. My dignity was returned, not because they gave it back, but because I took it back. My final thought is this. They left me in the cold. I left them with nothing.